My name is Rowena. I am 34 years old, and my coworker tried to steal the biggest project of my entire career right out from under me. Before I tell you how I let her walk into a boardroom and present my hard work to the entire leadership team, let me know where you are watching from in the comments down below. She always smiled. That was the very first thing you would notice about Jolene. It was a bright, wide, confident smile that could absolutely charm a snake out of a basket. She was the golden child of our office. And I was the one who actually did the heavy lifting. Let me paint a picture for you so you can understand exactly what my life looked like back then. Every single morning, my alarm clock would start blaring at exactly 4:30 in the morning. I would roll out of my sagging mattress, my feet hitting the cold linoleum floor of my small, one-bedroom apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city. I would walk into my tiny kitchen, turn on the harsh overhead light, and make a pot of the cheapest dark roast coffee I could find at the grocery store. I did not have the luxury of buying those fancy $6 lattes. Every single penny I earned had a designated purpose before my paycheck even hit my bank account. My rent took up a massive portion of my salary. What was left over went directly to bills, groceries, and paying off the mountain of debt I had inherited. You see, my mother passed away 2 years ago. Her funeral was held on a freezing, rainy Tuesday in November. I stood there in the muddy grass, holding a cheap black umbrella, watching them lower the only family I had left, besides my sister, into the ground. When the lawyers finally sorted through my mother's estate, the inheritance I received was painfully small. It was just a few $1,000s, and every single cent of that inheritance went immediately toward paying off her outstanding medical bills and a fraction of my own old student loans. I had absolutely no safety net. I had no wealthy husband to fall back on, and I had no trust fund waiting for me. I only had my own 2 hands and my work ethic. Because of this, I drove 45 minutes through agonizing, bumper-to-bumper morning traffic on the interstate just to make sure I was sitting at my desk by 6:45 in the morning. The office was always completely empty and silent at that hour. The fluorescent lights were only half turned on, casting long shadows across the rows of gray cubicles. I actually liked the peace and quiet. It was the only time I could truly focus without the constant interruptions of corporate life. Then, around 9:15 in the morning, Jolene would finally float into the office. I use the word float because she never seemed to actually walk or rush like the rest of us normal people. She glided. She would come strolling in through the glass double doors holding a massive, iced caramel macchiato with extra whipped cream. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, looking like she just stepped out of a high-end salon. She wore tailored designer clothes, expensive leather heels that clicked sharply on the hardwood floors, and she always smelled like a boutique floral perfume. In the corner of our sterile, glass-walled boardroom during our morning briefs, I would sit quietly in the back and watch her operate. I would watch her glide seamlessly between the senior executives. She would laugh loudly at a terrible, unfunny joke from a senior director, throwing her head back perfectly. Then I would watch her touch our direct manager Vance on the arm in this reassuring, overly familiar way that made my stomach turn. The management team absolutely loved her. They saw her high energy, they heard her constantly using trendy corporate buzzwords, and they admired her endless, bulletproof confidence. But they did not see me. They did not see me tucked away in the back corner of the room, acting as the quiet, exhausted architect of the very things she was claiming credit for. Jolene genuinely thought this entire office was her own personal stage. She had absolutely no idea that I had written the entire script she was reading from. My desperation to succeed was not driven by ego. It was driven by pure survival, and more importantly, it was driven by my family. Let me explain why this job meant everything to me. During my 30-minute lunch breaks, I would sit at my desk, eating a cold turkey sandwich out of a plastic container, and I would call my older sister, Sarah. Sarah was going through the most horrific, nightmare divorce you could possibly imagine. Her ex-husband was a vindictive, cruel man who had decided to make her life a living hell. He had hired a ruthless legal team, and he was fighting dirty for full custody of my 6-year-old niece, little Mia. Every time I called Sarah, she was either crying or sounding completely dead inside from the sheer exhaustion of the legal battles. The lawyer called again today, Rowena, Sarah said to me during one of those lunch break phone calls. Her voice was trembling through the phone speaker. He needs another retainer fee. $5,000. I do not have it. I just do not have it anymore. He said if we do not pay by Friday, he is dropping my case, and I am going to lose custody of Mia. I gripped my plastic sandwich container so hard the plastic cracked. Sarah, you are not going to lose custody of her. I promise you. I will figure something out. I can take out a personal loan. I can put it on my credit cards. You cannot do that, Rowena, Sarah sobbed. You are already drowning in your own bills. I had to completely drain Mia's college fund just to pay the lawyer last month. Every single dollar I saved for her future is just gone. It is all gone. Hearing that broke my heart into a million pieces. Listen to me, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice low so my coworkers would not hear. I am working on a massive project right now. It is called Chimera. It is the biggest thing this company has ever seen. When this launches, and it is successful, I am guaranteed a major promotion. I am talking about a massive bump in my salary. Enough to help you pay the lawyer. Enough to start rebuilding Mia's college fund. Just hold on a little bit longer. Please. Let me handle this. That was the heavy, suffocating weight I carried on my shoulders every single day. Chimera was not just a project to me. It was a lifeline. It was the only way I could save my sister and my niece from complete ruin. For 4 grueling, agonizing months, my entire life had been swallowed whole by Project Chimera. Let me tell you exactly what it was. Chimera was a massive, highly complex, artificial intelligence-driven logistics model. It was designed to completely overhaul our entire company's national supply chain network. It analyzed weather patterns, trucking routes, warehouse inventory levels, and historical consumer demand to predict exactly where products needed to be before the stores even knew they needed them. We are talking about a system that was projected to save the corporation over $15 million in the first fiscal year alone. This was my absolute masterpiece. My fingerprints were heavily embedded on every single line of code, every complex data model, and every predictive algorithm. I poured my literal blood, sweat, and tears into that computer. I clearly remember the long, lonely nights fueled by stale office coffee and the constant, low hum of the computer servers in the IT department down the hall. After 7 o'clock in the evening, the building management would automatically turn off the main air conditioning to save money. The office would get incredibly stuffy and warm. The only people left were the nighttime cleaning crew pushing their loud vacuum cleaners, and me. I spent countless hours standing in front of the massive whiteboard in the empty conference room, sketching out detailed mathematical frameworks and data pipelines until my hands were completely stained with black and blue marker ink. I practically lived in that office chair. My back constantly ached, and my eyes were permanently bloodshot from staring at dual computer monitors for 14 hours a day. When I got hungry at 9 o'clock at night, I would walk down to the dimly lit break room and buy a pack of stale peanut butter crackers from the vending machine because I could not afford to order food delivery. That was my dinner. But I also remember the pure, unfiltered thrill that rushed through my veins when the main Python script finally ran without a single error message at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. I sat back in my chair, staring at the green text scrolling smoothly down the black screen. I wanted to cry from sheer relief. That project had become a part of me. It felt like I was building a massive, intricate house from the ground up, placing every single brick with my own bare hands. My colleague Thaddeus was a senior data analyst sitting 3 cubicles down from me. He had kind eyes that were always surrounded by dark, heavy circles, and a mind sharper than a razor blade. He would often see my old, beat-up sedan sitting completely alone in the massive parking lot late at night. Thaddeus was a genuinely good man who was dealing with his own personal nightmare. He was also going through a terrible divorce. His wife had moved out, taking all the furniture, leaving him in a completely empty house. He told me once that the silence in his house was so loud it made his ears ring. So, Thaddeus spent a lot of late nights at the office simply to avoid going back to that empty, echoing space. We found a sort of quiet, unspoken solidarity in those late hours. Two broken, exhausted people seeking refuge in spreadsheets and data. One evening, the rain was pouring down heavily outside, loudly hitting the thick glass office windows. Thaddeus walked slowly over to my desk. He was holding two steaming ceramic mugs. He set one gently on my desk. It was hot peppermint tea. The smell of the mint immediately cleared my tired head. He stood there for a long time, sipping his own tea, looking over my shoulder at the incredibly complex web of code displayed on my dual monitors. He let out a low, deeply impressed whistle that cut through the silence of the empty office. "This logic, it has got your signature all over it, Rowena," Thaddeus said to me, shaking his head in sheer amazement. "I have been in this industry for 20 years. No one else in this entire company builds a framework this clean. No one. This is truly, undeniably brilliant. You have built a $15 million engine by yourself." I smiled at him, feeling a wave of genuine gratitude wash over me. It felt so incredibly good to finally have my hard work acknowledged by someone who actually understood what they were looking at. "Thank you, Thaddeus," I replied, wrapping my cold hands around the warm ceramic mug. "I just really hope Vance sees it that way. If this presentation goes well next week, I am hoping it will finally lead to that senior promotion we talked about. I desperately need the salary increase. My sister is drowning in lawyer fees for her custody battle, and I promised I would help her." Thaddeus looked at me with a deep sadness in his eyes. He knew all about vicious lawyers and custody fights. "He would be absolutely blind not to promote you, Rowena," Thaddeus replied. But his tone carried a heavy hint of doubt. "Just be careful. Corporate managers like Vance rarely reward the people who actually shovel the coal. They reward the people who stand on the deck of the ship and wave at the passengers." I brushed off his warning, believing foolishly that undeniable results would automatically guarantee my success. But Thaddeus was the only person who actually saw the real work going into Chimera. In our weekly team meetings, however, the reality of office politics was a completely different story. Jolene was not a mastermind criminal who suddenly decided to steal my project overnight. She was far more insidious than that. She operated like a slow-acting poison. She approached me a few days later, using her classic cover of being the sweet, innocent, non-technical girl who just needed a little bit of help. It was a Wednesday morning. I was deeply focused on debugging a minor issue in the reporting module. Suddenly, the strong smell of expensive floral perfume hit my nose. I looked up to see Jolene standing perfectly beside my desk. She was holding a small, gourmet blueberry muffin from the incredibly expensive artisan bakery located in the lobby of our building. She placed it gently next to my keyboard with a dazzling, perfect smile. "Good morning, Rowena," Jolene chirped, her voice overly sweet and entirely too loud for that time of day. "I brought you a little treat. I noticed you have been working so incredibly hard lately, and I just wanted to show my appreciation." I looked at the muffin, then up at her. "Thank you, Jolene. That is very kind of you." I was highly suspicious, but I remained professional. Jolene leaned against my cubicle wall, crossing her arms elegantly. "So, I was looking at the upcoming agenda for the big presentation with the vice president next week. Vance wants me to help him introduce the strategic vision for Chimera before you dive into the deep technical weeds. But honestly, Rowena, you are just so incredibly smart, and I am so terrible with all this complex technical stuff. It makes my head spin." She let out a soft, self-deprecating giggle that sounded completely rehearsed. "Okay," I said slowly. "What exactly do you need from me?" "Well," Jolene continued, batting her eyelashes slightly. "Could you possibly just give me a high-level overview of what Chimera actually does? Just a quick summary in plain human language?" I want to make sure I am framing your hard work correctly when I do the introduction. I want to make you look as good as possible to the executives. I am a deeply logical person, and unfortunately, at that time, I was also incredibly naive about the depths of corporate manipulation. I genuinely believed we were on the same team. I believed she was just doing her job in marketing and strategy, and I was doing my job in data architecture. I wanted the project to succeed, and if her introduction helped the executives understand my technical presentation better, it would benefit all of us. It would secure my promotion. Sure, Jolene, I said, foolishly opening my bottom desk drawer. I pulled out a thick manila folder. I actually wrote a 5-page executive summary report last night. It breaks down the entire artificial intelligence model, the specific predictive algorithms we are using, and the exact dollar amounts of the projected cost savings for the supply chain. It explains the core concepts without using heavy coding jargon. I handed her the printed pages. Jolene's eyes lit up brightly as she took the document from my hands. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the paper tightly. "Oh, Rowena, you are an absolute lifesaver," Jolene exclaimed, pressing the folder to her chest. "This is exactly what I needed. I am going to study this tonight so I can set the perfect stage for you. You are the best." She turned and glided swiftly back to her desk, leaving the expensive muffin behind. I went back to my coding, completely unaware that I had just handed the keys to my entire future directly to a thief. The blatant unfairness of our workplace dynamic was put on full, humiliating display during our final team preparation meeting with our manager, Vance. It was Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week before the big presentation to Vice President Carmichael. We were sitting in the main boardroom. The large glass walls made me feel like I was a fish trapped in a giant aquarium. The polished wood table reflected the harsh glare of the overhead projector. Vance sat at the head of the table, wearing an expensive but remarkably tacky silk tie. I sat halfway down the table, nervously organizing a thick stack of printed charts and graphs. Jolene sat directly to Vance's right, leaning comfortably back in her plush leather chair, twirling a gold-plated pen between her fingers. I cleared my throat and stood up to present my findings on the data anomalies we needed to address before the launch. "Vance, if you look at page 12 of the packet I handed out, you will see that the historical data from the Midwest warehouses contains several significant outliers due to the severe winter storms last year. I have written a custom script to automatically filter these anomalies so they do not corrupt the predictive engine." I spoke clearly and professionally. I was extremely proud of the solution I had engineered. It was a complex problem that had taken me 3 sleepless nights to solve. But Vance did not even look down at the packet I had spent hours printing and binding for him. He simply looked at his heavy gold wristwatch, sighed loudly, and waved his hand dismissively in the air, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Great work, Rowena, truly," Vance said in a tone that clearly indicated he thought my work was incredibly boring. "We can circle back to all those dry technical details later. Nobody in senior leadership wants to hear about data filtering right now. We need a strong narrative." He turned his chair entirely to face Jolene, a wide, eager smile spreading across his face. "Jolene, what do you have for us? Do you have something splashy to open the presentation?" Jolene, who I knew for an absolute fact had not looked at a single spreadsheet or written a single line of code all year, leaned forward confidently. She placed her hands flat on the polished table, making sure everyone was looking directly at her. "Vance, I have been thinking very deeply about our market position," Jolene began, using a serious, authoritative voice. "I am thinking we really need to aggressively leverage synergistic disruption across all of our vertical shipping channels. If we seamlessly integrate proactive paradigm shifts into the core logistics matrix, we can completely revolutionize the consumer experience." I stared at her. My jaw practically unhinged. She had literally just strung together a random collection of completely meaningless corporate buzzwords like they were a string of expensive pearls. Her sentence meant absolutely nothing. It was empty air. It was a hollow shell of words designed to sound smart to people who had no idea how the actual business operated. Vance, however, absolutely beamed at her. His eyes widened with sheer admiration. He clapped his hands together once, pointing a finger at her. Exactly, Jolene. Spot on. That is exactly the kind of big picture, forward-thinking strategy we need to present to the vice president. Fantastic work. I slowly sat back down in my chair. The stack of highly detailed, mathematically perfect charts in front of me suddenly felt completely worthless. I felt myself physically shrink in my seat, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. I was becoming completely invisible once again. It was a horribly familiar, suffocating feeling. I bit the inside of my lip so hard I could actually taste a metallic hint of copper blood. The sheer injustice of the situation burned in my chest like a hot coal. I went home that Friday evening feeling utterly defeated and drained of all my energy. The weekend offered no real comfort, only a harsh reminder of exactly why I could not afford to quit or cause a massive scene at the office. On Saturday morning, I drove my old car to my sister Sarah's small rental house. The paint on her front porch was peeling badly. I took my 6-year-old niece, little Mia, to the local neighborhood park to give Sarah a few hours of much-needed quiet time. The park was old and slightly run down. The metal chains on the swing set were covered in thick orange rust, and they squeaked loudly every time Mia swung back and forth. I stood there pushing her, watching her bright, innocent smile. She had no idea her entire world was currently being fought over by ruthless men in expensive suits in cold courtrooms. I dug into the bottom of my purse, gathering up handfuls of loose silver quarters and dimes just so I could afford to buy Mia a simple vanilla ice cream cone from the truck parked on the corner. I handed the coins to the vendor, feeling a sharp pang of deep humiliation. I was a senior data architect managing a $15 million project, and I was counting pennies for ice cream. Later that afternoon, I sat on the faded floral sofa with Sarah. She looked incredibly pale and exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes mirrored my own. Did the lawyer call back? I asked gently, handing her a mug of hot water with lemon. Sarah nodded slowly, staring blankly at the blank television screen. Yes. His office sent another threatening invoice. My ex-husband is demanding full physical custody again. He told the judge I am financially unstable because I had to move into this cheap rental house. Rowena, he is going to take her away from me because he has more money. It is not fair. She broke down, burying her face in her trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I moved closer and wrapped my arms tightly around her shaking shoulders. He is not going to take her, Sarah. I will not let that happen. The massive presentation for Chimera is this Thursday. Once Vice President Carmichael sees the system I built, Vance will have absolutely no choice but to give me the promotion and the salary increase. I will have the money for the lawyer. We will replenish the college fund. I promise you, Sarah. Just give me 5 more days. We will be okay. On Sunday evening, I sat in my own small kitchen. I carefully packed my leftover meatloaf and cheap mashed potatoes into several plastic containers to take to work for my lunches during the week. I stared at the plastic lids, reaffirming my absolute determination. I would go in there, I would deliver the perfect presentation, and I would save my family. I had to. There was no other option. The devastating storm finally broke on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days before the massive presentation to Vice President Carmichael. This was the meeting that would ultimately decide the fate of the Chimera project and, by extension, my entire career and my sister's future. I had been sitting at my desk since 6 in the morning, running the final stress tests on the artificial intelligence server. Around 10 o'clock, my throat felt incredibly dry. I grabbed my cheap, reusable plastic water cup and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the employee break room. To get to the break room, I had to walk directly past Vance's large corner office. The hallway was completely empty. As I approached his door, I noticed it was not fully closed. It was cracked open just an inch or two. As I walked past the narrow opening, I heard Jolene's voice echoing from inside the room. Her tone immediately made my stomach violently drop. It was oozing with this sickening, incredibly thick false modesty. And of course, Vance, Jolene was saying, sighing dramatically as if she carried the weight of the entire world on her delicate shoulders. I was up all night long finalizing the intricate details of the artificial intelligence model for the presentation. I stopped dead in my tracks. My feet felt like they had been instantly glued to the ugly gray carpet. My breathing completely stopped. The cheap plastic water cup in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, like it was filled with solid lead. I felt the warm blood completely drain from my face, running freezing cold in my veins. I slowly, silently stepped closer to the gap in the heavy wooden door. I held my breath and listened closely. It was an absolute beast of a problem, Vance, Jolene continued, her voice sounding perfectly distressed. The predictive algorithms were completely misaligned with the historical Midwest warehouse data. But I stayed up until 3 in the morning, and I finally cracked the code. I wrote a custom script to filter out the anomalies caused by the winter storms. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. She was reciting, word for exact word, the key findings from the executive summary report I had foolishly handed her the week before. She was taking my exact words, my hard-earned findings, my countless sleepless nights, and my brilliant technical breakthrough, and she was serving it up to our manager on a silver platter as her own personal triumph. I waited for Vance to say something. I desperately waited for him to correct her, to say, "Wait a minute, Jolene, Rowena presented that exact solution in the meeting last week." But Vance did not correct her. Instead, I heard the sound of him clapping his hands together enthusiastically. "Incredible work, Jolene." "Absolutely outstanding," Vance said, his voice dripping with blind admiration. "I knew I could count on you to step up and lead this initiative. The vice president is going to be completely blown away by your dedication. I am officially putting you in charge of delivering the entire technical presentation on Thursday. You own this project now, Jolene." I stood frozen in the hallway. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal crashed over me like a freezing tidal wave. My plastic water cup slipped from my numb fingers and fell directly into a nearby plastic trash can with a dull, hollow thud. Neither of them heard it over the sound of their own self-congratulations. I felt a hot, fiery flash of pure, unfiltered anger crawl rapidly up my neck and burn across my face. My vision actually blurred for a second. But beneath that burning, suffocating heat, there was a thick, solid layer of absolute ice forming in my chest. It was not just mindless, reactionary anger anymore. It was a terrifying, absolute mental clarity. I knew exactly what was happening. Jolene was completely stealing my project. Vance was eagerly letting her do it because he preferred her polished, bubbly personality over my quiet competence. And if Jolene presented my work and took the credit, she would be the one getting the massive promotion. She would get the huge salary increase. And I would be left in the dust, entirely unable to pay my sister's lawyer. My niece Mia would be taken away, and her college fund would remain empty forever. Jolene was not just stealing my computer code, she was actively destroying my family's survival. I slowly turned around on my heels. I forced my shaking legs to move, and I walked quietly and quickly away before either of them could look up and see me standing outside the door. The long hallway felt like it was stretching out forever, the walls violently closing in on me. I went straight to the deserted women's restroom on the 3rd floor. I pushed the heavy wooden door open with both hands, walked directly over to the row of sinks, and gripped the cold porcelain edges. I stared intently at my own reflection in the large, brightly lit mirror. My face was completely pale, entirely devoid of color. My eyes were wide with shock, the rims bright red. My hair was slightly messy from running my hands through it all morning. I looked like a woman who had just been robbed in broad daylight. For just a passing second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered hurt and deep, violent fury in my own eyes. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink so hard my knuckles turned completely white, my nails digging into the hard surface. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I really did. I wanted to storm right back down that long hallway, kick Vance's office door wide open, and expose her vicious lies right then and there. I wanted to scream about the endless late nights, the vending machine dinners, the missed family moments. I wanted to demand the respect and the promotion that I was rightfully owed. But then I forced myself to stop. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I looked at my tired reflection and asked myself a very logical question: then what? What happens after I scream? If I walked into that office and started yelling, it would just be my word against the word of the beloved office darling. Vance was already completely under her spell. He would immediately defend her. He would label me as a hysterical, jealous, and uncooperative employee who could not handle teamwork. I thought carefully about walking down to the Human Resources Department to file an official complaint. But I knew exactly how that corporate machine operated. It would immediately trigger a long, drawn-out, agonizing investigative process. It would involve endless closed-door meetings and formal complaint forms. And it would ultimately end with a completely useless he said, she said stalemate. Jolene would simply widen her eyes, produce a few fake, delicate tears, and smoothly smile her way right out of it. She would sweetly claim that we had collaborated heavily on the project, but that she had naturally taken the ultimate leadership role, and I was simply confused about my minor contribution. Human Resources always protected the management's favorites. They protected the company, not the workers. I would be quietly reassigned, entirely passed over for the promotion, or quietly fired a few months later for a fabricated reason. Looking intently at my own exhausted reflection, with the dark, heavy circles under my eyes earned from building the very project she was currently stealing, I realized a cold, undeniable truth. The corporate system was entirely broken. They had left me absolutely no conventional, professional path to get justice. Playing politely by their rigged rules was only going to guarantee my total destruction. So, I decided right then and there, standing in the cold silence of that bathroom, that I would just have to create my own brutal path to justice. I reached out and turned on the chrome faucet. I splashed freezing cold water onto my pale face, letting the shock of the temperature jolt my system. I pulled a rough brown paper towel from the dispenser and patted my skin dry. The fiery anger and the stinging, humiliating hurt slowly began to recede. They were rapidly replaced by a cold, hard, unshakable resolve that felt like solid steel forming in my spine. I was not going to run into that office and fight her. Fighting her directly was exactly what she would expect if she eventually got caught. It would give her the opportunity to defend herself and spin the narrative. Instead, I was going to let her have exactly what she wanted. I was going to let her take the stage. I was going to let her walk blindly, confidently, right into a massive, inescapable trap of her own making. I smoothed down the wrinkles in my inexpensive blouse. I threw the damp paper towel into the trash can. I pushed the bathroom door open and walked calmly, with a completely new posture, back down the hallway to my desk. I sat down in my worn-out office chair, grabbed my computer mouse, and started clicking, pretending to review some mundane emails. My heart rate was completely steady now. The victim was gone. The architect was back in control. Thaddeus walked by my cubicle a few minutes later, holding a fresh cup of coffee. He stopped immediately when he saw my face. He knew me well enough to recognize the subtle shift in my energy. The stress was gone, replaced by something much sharper. He leaned in slightly, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. "Rowena, are you all right? You look different. Did something happen in Vance's office?" I looked up at Thaddeus. I gave him a small, polite, incredibly calm smile. "I am completely fine, Thaddeus," I said to him, keeping my voice perfectly steady and reassuring. "In fact, I have never been better. Absolutely everything is going exactly according to plan." The drive home that Tuesday evening felt like it lasted for an entire lifetime. The rain was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, beating violently against the cracked windshield of my old sedan. My windshield wipers were squeaking, making a rhythmic, highly annoying sound that somehow helped me focus my racing, chaotic thoughts. I did not turn on the radio to listen to the evening news. I did not connect my phone to listen to music. I desperately needed the complete silence. I needed to meticulously plan my next move. When I finally pulled into the assigned parking spot at my small apartment complex, I just sat there in the driver's seat for a solid 10 minutes. I watched the rain hit the dark pavement, illuminated only by the flickering yellow street lamp above. I thought about my sister, Sarah. I thought about the massive stack of legal documents currently sitting on her cheap kitchen table. Those documents were from a ruthless lawyer who was actively trying to win full physical custody of my niece, Mia, for a vindictive ex-husband who barely even knew her favorite color. The divorce proceedings had entirely drained Sarah's spirit and her bank account. I thought about the meager inheritance we had received after my mother's funeral 2 years ago, and how every single penny of it was already gone. I could not fail them. I simply could not let Jolene win. I unlocked the front door to my apartment. The air inside was stale and slightly warm because I always turned the thermostat off during the day to save money on the electric bill. I walked into the narrow kitchen, turned on the harsh overhead fluorescent light, and opened the refrigerator door. The shelves were mostly empty. I pulled out one of the plastic containers of leftover meatloaf and cheap mashed potatoes I had carefully packed on Sunday. I put the container into the microwave and watched the yellow light spin around and around for 2 full minutes. I ate my dinner standing up at the kitchen counter, using a plastic fork. My mind was racing a mile a minute, but my hands were completely steady. I was no longer the frightened, overworked sister desperately begging for corporate scraps. I was a senior data architect, and I was about to engineer the most important, critical system of my entire life. I walked over to my small, battered wooden desk sitting in the corner of my living room. I turned on my personal laptop computer and waited for the operating system to load. I connected to the secure company server through our virtual private network. The bright blue glow of the computer screen illuminated the dark room, casting long shadows against the painted walls. First, I needed to firmly set the bait for the trap. I opened the company's shared network drive. This was the central, public folder where all the marketing, strategy, and management teams pulled their presentation files from for their daily meetings. I knew Jolene was incredibly lazy. I knew her work habits intimately. I knew for an absolute fact that she would not spend her Wednesday evening reviewing the complex technical data or practicing the slides. She would simply log into this shared folder on Thursday morning, 5 minutes before the massive meeting, and drag the file onto the boardroom computer desktop. I slowly scrolled through the directory and opened the presentation file currently sitting on the shared server. It was an incredibly early, extremely rough working draft of the Chimera project from over 2 weeks ago. It was full of grand, sweeping ideas and very nice-looking title slides, but the core technical data was completely incomplete. It was a hollow, empty shell. I went through the presentation slides, one by single one. I deliberately made sure that the major analytical charts were clearly labeled with the word placeholder in a light gray font. I ensured that the key data pipelines and the artificial intelligence logic diagrams led to absolute dead ends. I deleted 3 critical slides that explained the financial cost savings. I made sure the document looked entirely plausible if you only gave it a passing, 10-second glance, but I also made absolutely sure it would completely fall apart under the absolute slightest professional scrutiny from anyone who actually understood logistics. I saved the file directly to the shared server, leaving the file title exactly as it was originally named, Chimera Official Presentation Draft. It was the perfect, entirely invisible trap. I closed the server connection, logged out of the virtual private network, and leaned back in my wooden chair, letting out a long, slow breath. My final move of the night was creating my absolute, undeniable insurance policy. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a sleek, silver Universal Serial bus drive. I held the small, cold piece of metal in the palm of my hand. I plugged it into my laptop. I took my finished, perfect, 32-slide masterpiece, the real Project Chimera, and I copied it directly onto the silver drive. Every single pie chart was triple-checked. Every single data point was verified against the warehouse logs. This small silver drive held my entire future, my potential senior promotion, and the massive salary increase my family desperately needed to survive. But I needed concrete, digital proof that I was the original author of this data. I opened my company email account. I attached a password-protected copy of the real, finished presentation, and I addressed the email to Thaddeus. The subject line of the email read, "Final Backup Project Chimera." I typed the body of the email slowly and deliberately. "Hello Thaddeus. I just finished the final presentation deck for the meeting on Thursday. I am attaching a password-protected copy here just in case the main server crashes or something goes wrong with the network on the day of the presentation. My nerves are completely shot from all the stress of this project. I will talk to you tomorrow. Best regards, Rowena." I took a deep breath, moved the computer mouse, and clicked the send button. The email instantly vanished from my outbox. The digital timestamp on that email, processed by the central corporate exchange server, was my unbreakable, irrefutable alibi. It was my absolute proof of authorship, locked securely in the company system where neither Jolene nor Vance could ever delete it. I safely ejected the silver drive, placed it into my purse, closed my laptop, walked into my bedroom, and fell asleep almost instantly. It was the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in 4 grueling months. The next morning was Wednesday. I woke up at my usual time of 4:30 in the morning. I brewed my cheap dark roast coffee, drank it in the silence of my kitchen, and drove to the office. I walked into the building with a perfectly neutral, unreadable expression on my face. I sat at my desk and continued running mundane, routine diagnostic checks on the secondary servers. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I smelled the overwhelming scent of floral perfume before I even saw her. Jolene glided past my cubicle. She was holding a fresh, massive iced caramel coffee, looking as radiant, beautiful, and untroubled as she always did. She was wearing a stunning, tailored white blazer that probably cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. "Good morning, Rowena," Jolene called out cheerfully, stopping at the edge of my desk. "Are you getting excited for the big day tomorrow? Vance and I are going to make sure your little data project shines for the executives." I slowly looked up from my computer monitors. I looked directly into her bright blue eyes. My face was a perfectly constructed mask of polite, professional courtesy. I did not clench my jaw. I did not narrow my eyes. "Good morning, Jolene," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat and pleasant. "Yes, I am very much looking forward to seeing exactly how the presentation goes tomorrow. I genuinely wish you the absolute best of luck." She smiled brightly, completely oblivious to the massive, career-ending trap currently resting quietly on the shared network server. "Thank you so much. We are going to knock their socks off. Vance is so thrilled with the narrative I built." She turned and glided away down the carpeted hallway. I watched her go, feeling absolutely nothing but cold anticipation. Thursday morning finally arrived. The atmosphere on the top floor of the corporate building was incredibly heavy. The main executive boardroom was buzzing with that specific, thick tension that only comes right before a high-stakes corporate meeting. Millions of dollars were on the line. The boardroom was a massive, intimidating space. It had floor-to-ceiling glass walls that looked out over the entire downtown skyline. In the center of the room sat a gigantic, polished mahogany table surrounded by 20 plush, black leather chairs. Senior directors and regional managers were standing around the edges of the room, nervously sipping black coffee from delicate white porcelain cups and speaking in hushed, serious tones. I walked into the room very quietly and took a seat in the far back corner, completely out of the direct line of sight of the podium. I smoothed down my dark blue skirt. It was not a designer outfit, but it was clean, pressed, and professional. Inside the right pocket of my blazer, my fingers tightly gripped the cold, smooth metal of the silver Universal Serial bus drive. I rolled it back and forth between my thumb and my index finger, grounding myself in the physical reality of the moment. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy glass double doors opened wide. Ms. Carmichael, the vice president of strategy, walked into the room. She was a tall, incredibly imposing woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun. She did not waste her valuable time on fake smiles, warm handshakes, or meaningless small talk. Her presence alone commanded immediate, absolute silence. The low hum of nervous corporate chatter died instantly. Every single executive in the room scrambled to quickly take their assigned seats around the table. Vance sat immediately to her left. He was sweating slightly, adjusting his silk tie, looking incredibly eager to please her. Jolene stood confidently at the wooden podium at the front of the room. She was practically glowing with unearned, arrogant confidence. She was wearing a bright red dress that commanded attention. As she plugged the standard boardroom laptop into the overhead projector system, she looked across the room, found me sitting in the back corner, and gave me a tiny, incredibly condescending glance of pure pity. It was the exact look you give a loyal, tired dog who has done a good trick but does not get to eat at the dining table with the humans. I did not break eye contact. I just stared back at her with a blank, empty expression. The show was finally about to begin. "Good morning, everyone," Jolene started, her voice incredibly bright, loud, and projecting perfectly across the silent, tense room. "Today, Vance and I are incredibly proud to officially unveil Project Chimera. This is the absolute future of our national supply chain logistics." The first few slides of the presentation were absolutely fine. They were the simple title page and the basic meeting agenda. Jolene was reciting my 5-page executive summary report completely from memory. She sounded highly intelligent. She sounded like a true corporate visionary. She paused at the perfect moments for emphasis. Vance was nodding along vigorously, looking incredibly proud of his golden child. He looked over at Ms. Carmichael, desperately hoping to see a smile of approval on her face. Ms. Carmichael simply watched the screen, her face completely unreadable. Then, Jolene confidently clicked her wireless remote to advance to slide number 5. This was the critical slide that was meant to show the core problem analysis regarding our massive Midwest shipping delays during the winter season. The chart that suddenly appeared on the massive, bright projector screen was a complete, chaotic disaster. It was a messy collection of empty gray boxes, broken trend lines, and placeholder data. The bold title at the very top of the slide read, in bright red font, "Insert Q3 logistics data here." A sharp, sudden flicker of deep confusion crossed Jolene's perfectly powdered face. She blinked twice, looking at the massive screen behind her, and then looking down quickly at her laptop monitor, hoping it was just a display error. But she was a professional talker, so she desperately tried to power her way through the disaster using her usual charm and empty vocabulary. "So, as you can clearly see from the visual representation on the board," Jolene said, her voice wavering just a tiny fraction of an inch, "the preliminary data indicates some very significant challenges in our routing protocols." She clicked the wireless remote again, desperately hoping the next slide would save her from the growing embarrassment. The next slide was meant to heavily detail the complex architecture of the artificial intelligence machine learning model. Instead, the screen displayed a single, massive white box with the words, "Artificial Intelligence Diagram Pending Final Technical Review." The air in the boardroom violently shifted. It became incredibly thick, heavy, and suffocating. The supportive, encouraging nods from the senior directors completely stopped. Several people shifted very uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. The director of finance frowned deeply, crossing his arms over his chest. Jolene's bright, confident smile started to look incredibly brittle, like cheap, thin glass ready to shatter into 1,000 pieces. She was visibly sweating now. Small, distinct beads of moisture formed on her forehead and above her upper lip. Her hands began to shake slightly. She began stammering, desperately trying to bluff her way through highly complex predictive coding concepts that she fundamentally did not understand. The synergistic integration of the algorithms, Jolene stuttered, looking desperately toward Vance for a lifeline. It allows for proactive paradigm shifts in the warehouse inventory, which will synergize the deliverables. Vance was no longer smiling. His face had completely drained of all color. He looked exactly like a man watching his incredibly expensive luxury car roll slowly over the edge of a steep, rocky cliff. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and save the presentation, but no words came out. Ms. Carmichael, who had been watching the entire disaster spectacle unfold without a single change in her completely neutral, stone-cold expression, finally moved. She slowly reached out and pressed the button on the boardroom conference phone to mute the outside callers. Her voice cut through the awkward, incredibly painful silence like a freshly sharpened steel blade. "Excuse me, Ms. Jolene. Please stop talking immediately." Jolene froze completely mid-sentence, her mouth hanging slightly open, her hands suspended in the air. The wireless remote slipped from her sweaty fingers and clattered loudly onto the wooden podium. Ms. Carmichael looked down at the thick stack of printed paper sitting on the desk in front of her. It was the comprehensive pre-read packet that had been distributed to the senior leadership team the night before. I had ensured that my name was heavily featured in the technical appendix of that packet. The pre-read packet I received specifically mentioned a detailed, fully functional Python model that has already been extensively stress-tested, Ms. Carmichael said, tapping her index finger against the paper. This presentation on the screen appears to be an incredibly early, completely unfinished draft. Furthermore, none of the financial numbers you are currently attempting to speak about are actually supported by the blank slides behind you. Jolene swallowed hard. The sound was audible in the quiet room. I sincerely apologize, Ms. Carmichael. There seems to be a major technical glitch with the central server file. The system must have corrupted the data. Ms. Carmichael did not look at Jolene. She did not accept the pathetic excuse. She looked back down at the printed packet, flipping to the final page. "It also says here in the technical appendix," Ms. Carmichael continued, her voice dangerously calm, precise, and completely devoid of warmth, "that Rowena is the lead data analyst and the primary technical architect who actually developed this entire artificial intelligence model from the ground up." Every single head in the large boardroom turned simultaneously. Dozens of eyes searched the room, following the direction of Ms. Carmichael's gaze, until they found me, sitting quietly in my chair in the far back corner. Ms. Carmichael's sharp, highly intelligent eyes locked directly onto mine. She did not look angry. She looked expectant. "Ms. Rowena," Ms. Carmichael said, slowly setting her silver pen down on the polished mahogany table. "Perhaps you can shed some actual light on this highly embarrassing situation. If you have made it this far into my story, please do me a massive favor, like the video and comment the number 1 down below in the comment section. It lets me know exactly how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your continued support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me to share my life. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get right back to the absolute best part of my story." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool, air-conditioned air fill my lungs completely. I did not rush. I stood up from my chair smoothly. I pushed my chair back, the wheels rolling quietly over the carpet. I looked directly across the massive room, past the staring directors, past a sweating Vance, and locked my eyes onto the vice president. "Yes, Ms. Carmichael. I absolutely can." I walked slowly and purposefully out from the dark corner. I walked past the long row of seated executives. I walked directly up to the wooden podium where Jolene was standing. As I approached her space, Jolene shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. Her blue eyes were wide with total panic and absolute, burning hatred. She realized exactly what was happening, but she was entirely powerless to stop it. I completely ignored her. I did not even acknowledge her physical presence as I stepped up to the laptop. I reached into my right pocket, pulled out the sleek silver universal serial bus drive, and calmly, deliberately plugged it into the side port of the presentation computer. I opened the File Explorer, double-clicked my final, password-protected presentation, entered the security key, and pressed the full-screen display button. My real presentation instantly appeared on the massive projector screen. It was 32 slides of flawless, deeply detailed, mathematically irrefutable work. The data charts were perfectly colored and clearly labeled. The highly complex data pipelines were mapped out so clearly that even a child could follow the logic. The projected $15 million cost savings were highlighted in bold, undeniable green text right in the center of the summary slide. I did not just stand there and lazily read the bullet points on the slides like Jolene had tried to do. I did not need notes. I knew this project intimately because it was quite literally a piece of my own soul. I turned to face the room, and I told the compelling, undeniable story behind the raw numbers. I explained exactly how the severe winter weather patterns in the Midwest directly affected the commercial trucking routes, causing massive delays. I explained how the artificial intelligence model learned from our historical shipping mistakes to automatically redirect trucks and completely prevent future warehouse inventory shortages before they ever happened. I spoke with absolute authority. My voice did not shake. When the very strict, highly skeptical senior financial director raised his hand and asked an incredibly tough, highly technical question about exactly how the system was handling extreme data outliers during the chaotic holiday shopping season, I answered him without a single second of hesitation. "That is an excellent point, sir," I said, my voice ringing clear, steady, and completely confident across the boardroom. "That is a specific result of the custom data filtering script I wrote last week to automatically isolate and handle anomalous holiday purchase data. This specific script addresses that very issue and completely prevents the automated system from over-ordering expensive inventory that will not sell." I clicked the wireless remote to the next slide, which displayed the exact mathematical filtering parameters I had coded. I looked over at Jolene, who was now standing very awkwardly against the side glass wall, trying to make herself look as small as possible. "That specific script," I added, my tone remaining entirely professional and completely calm, "probably was not integrated into the much earlier, heavily incomplete draft that was mistakenly pulled from the shared server by the marketing team this morning." I did not need to point my finger directly at her face. I did not need to raise my voice and scream that she was a complete, thieving fraud. I did not need to throw an emotional temper tantrum in front of the executives. My undeniable, flawless work was speaking for me in a powerful language that was absolutely clear to every single leader in that room. The absolute truth was unfolding, slide by detailed slide, right in front of the very people she had so desperately tried to fool with her empty corporate buzzwords. The entire power dynamic of the boardroom had been completely rewritten in a matter of 20 short minutes. I was no longer the invisible, tired, overworked woman sitting quietly in the back corner of the room. I was the absolute expert. I was the sole architect. I was the single person in that building holding the technical keys to the $15 million savings. When I finally concluded the presentation, summarizing the next steps for the national rollout, and turned off the projector screen, the large room was completely silent for exactly 2 seconds. And then, the genuine, enthusiastic applause started. Several senior directors nodded at me with deep, visible respect. The skeptical financial director actually smiled. Ms. Carmichael looked at me, slowly closed her leather notebook, and gave me a firm, highly approving nod that sent a massive wave of relief crashing through my entire body. As the executives began to stand up, gather their papers, and file out of the large glass doors to head to their next meetings, several of them stopped specifically by the podium to shake my hand and personally congratulate me on the brilliant technical architecture. Vance was the very first person to flee the room. He grabbed his briefcase, kept his head down, and practically ran out the door, completely avoiding my gaze. He knew his days of playing favorites were over. I was quietly packing up my laptop and my notes when Jolene suddenly stepped out from behind the heavy wooden door. She cornered me near the front of the room. The boardroom was entirely empty now, just the two of us standing in the aftermath of her disaster. Her face was a horrific, messy mask of complete rage, ruined expensive makeup, and total, crushing humiliation. "Why did you do that to me?" Jolene hissed, stepping aggressively into my personal space. Her voice was low, violently shaking, and dripping with absolute venom. "You completely sabotaged me in front of the vice president. You ruined my reputation." I stopped packing my canvas bag. I stood up perfectly straight, squared my shoulders, and looked directly into her tear-filled blue eyes. I did not look at her with anger. The hot anger had completely burned out of my system days ago in that bathroom. I looked at her with a strange, incredibly cold, heavily detached sort of pity. "I did not do anything to you, Jolene," I said calmly, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the heavy, crushing weight of absolute truth. "I simply brought the finished, functional work to the meeting. You are the specific person who actively chose to go onto the public server, take a file you did not write, and present a technical draft you fundamentally did not understand." Jolene opened her mouth to argue, her face turning bright red, but I took one deliberate step closer to her, forcing her to physically lean back against the wall. "You did not just try to playfully steal my data project to get a pat on the back," I said, staring right through her empty facade. "You tried to steal my promotion. You actively tried to steal the salary increase I desperately needed to pay the lawyer for my sister's divorce. If you had succeeded today, my sister would have lost custody of her child because we could not afford the legal fees. You tried to permanently steal my niece's college fund so you could buy more designer shoes. You tried to steal my entire family's future because you were too incredibly lazy to do the hard work yourself. I did not sabotage you, Jolene. I just gave you the exact presentation you actually deserved to give." I held her furious, humiliated gaze for 1 second longer, watching the realization wash over her that she had completely lost. Then, I picked up my canvas bag, turned around, and walked out of the glass doors without looking back over my shoulder. The conversation was permanently over. The absolute boundary had been drawn in permanent black ink. The change in the corporate office environment the very next day was immediate and completely seismic. It was exactly like a heavy, dark, oppressive spell had been instantly broken over the entire department. When I walked to my small cubicle on Friday morning, 3 different regional managers stopped specifically by my desk to ask for my professional opinion on their upcoming quarterly data sets. People were actively including me in the important strategic conversations happening in the hallways. Thaddeus walked over to my desk, gave me a massive, genuine smile that reached his tired eyes, and silently handed me a fresh, hot cup of premium coffee from the expensive artisan bakery in the lobby. We did not need to exchange words. He knew exactly what had happened. Vance, my old manager, could not even bring himself to meet my eyes when he walked past my desk. He spent the entire day hiding like a coward behind his closed office door, terrified of the impending, inevitable fallout from senior management. 1 week later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I received a formal, high-priority calendar invitation in my email inbox. Ms. Carmichael, the vice president, had called me directly into her office for a private meeting. Her office was a massive, beautifully decorated corner suite on the absolute top floor of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning, panoramic view of the entire city skyline. It looked like a completely different world up there. I walked in and sat down in the plush leather chair across from her massive, dark wood desk. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "Rowena," Ms. Carmichael said, folding her hands together neatly on the polished desk. "I do not tolerate incompetence in my division, and I absolutely, fundamentally despise intellectual theft. I have reviewed your actual file, and I have reviewed Vance's management history. Competence needs to be in charge of this company, not popularity." She opened her top drawer and slid a thick, heavy white envelope across the polished wood directly toward me. "I am officially making you the lead strategic director for the entire national rollout of Project Chimera," Ms. Carmichael stated firmly, her eyes locked on mine. "You will no longer report to Vance. Vance is currently being transitioned out of the company. You will report directly to me. Inside that envelope is your new employment contract. It includes the senior promotion title and a base salary increase that accurately, fairly reflects the $15 million you are about to save this corporation this year. I picked up the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. I broke the seal and pulled out the thick parchment paper. I looked down at the printed numbers on the final page of the contract. The new salary was significantly more than I had ever dared to hope for. It was not just a small raise. It was life-changing money. It was enough. It was finally more than enough. It was enough money to immediately hire the absolute best, most ruthless family lawyer in the entire city for my sister. It was enough to permanently secure her victory in the custody battle after her horrific, draining divorce. It was enough to completely rebuild little Mia's college fund from the ground up, ensuring her future was safe, and I would still have enough money left over to finally move out of my cramped, cold apartment on the edge of the city. I thought about my mother's rainy funeral, and how I had promised her grave that I would survive in this world. I had done much more than survive. I had won. "Thank you, Ms. Carmichael," I said, my voice thick with deep, genuine emotion. I swallowed hard to keep the tears from falling. "You have absolutely no idea what this means to my family." "You earned it, Rowena," she replied simply. "Now, go execute the project." The very next morning, a brief, highly sterile, two-sentence company-wide email was sent out by the Central Human Resources Department. It simply announced Jolene's formal resignation from the company, effective immediately to pursue other opportunities. There was no farewell party in the break room. There was no sheet cake. There were no goodbye cards signed by the staff. She was just gone, erased from the corporate directory. Later that afternoon, I was carefully cleaning out my old cubicle to move my belongings upstairs into my new private office. I lifted up my old computer keyboard to pack it into a cardboard box, and I found a small, neatly folded piece of white paper resting underneath it. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting on the paper was sharp, jagged, and clearly written in deep, lingering anger. It was not a heartfelt apology. Jolene was fundamentally not the kind of person who would ever possess the self-awareness to apologize for her toxic actions. It was something far more honest, and far more bitter than an apology. The note simply read, "You were right. 6 entire months have passed since that incredibly chaotic, life-altering day in the boardroom. I am now sitting in a beautiful, spacious office with a heavy wooden door that actually closes. I am confidently leading a massive, talented team of data analysts, continuing to build, refine, and expand on the incredibly strong technical foundation of Project Chimera. The rollout has been a massive success across the country. My sister Sarah officially won her legal custody battle last month. Her vindictive ex-husband completely backed down the exact moment her new, highly expensive, terrifying lawyer walked into the local courtroom. The divorce is finalized, and Sarah is finally smiling again. Mia's college fund is safely sitting in a high-yield savings account at the bank, growing steadily every single month. Thaddeus was recently promoted to be my direct assistant manager, and he finally finalized his own painful divorce, finding genuine peace and quiet in a brand-new apartment downtown. Sometimes, in the middle of a massive, high-pressure corporate presentation, standing confidently in front of the entire senior leadership team, I think back to that small, bitter note Jolene left hidden on my desk. I still keep it tucked safely inside the bottom right drawer of my new desk. I do not keep it as a cruel trophy to gloat over my victory. I keep it as a very important, daily reminder to myself. It reminds me that the loudest, most confident voice in the room is not always the truest voice. It reminds me that stealing credit, using empty corporate buzzwords, and flashing a fake, charming smile will eventually, inevitably crumble under the heavy, undeniable weight of reality. It took me a very long time, and a massive amount of painful, silent suffering in the dark corners of the office, but I finally learned the absolute most valuable lesson of my entire professional career. Sometimes, the only way to truly be heard in a loud, chaotic world that actively refuses to listen to you, is to step back, lay a perfect, flawless trap, and let your undeniable hard work speak entirely for itself. And now, listening to the quiet, steady hum of the massive corporate servers, and seeing the beautifully clean, perfect logic of my computer code running the logistics network, my work is finally speaking in a powerful, irrefutable language that absolutely no one will ever be able to steal from me again. Thank you so much for taking the valuable time out of your day to sit down and listen to my story today. It is a crazy, highly stressful journey, I know. But it is my absolute truth, and I needed to share it. I am incredibly curious about your own personal experiences in the workplace or in your family. Have you ever worked with someone exactly like Jolene? Have you ever had a toxic coworker or a manipulative family member try to completely take credit for your hard work, your financial sacrifices, or your ideas? And if so, how did you personally handle that horrific situation? Did you confront them directly, or did you let the universe and karma do the heavy lifting for you? Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. I sit down and read every single one of them, and I would absolutely love to hear your stories, offer my support, and connect with all of you. And if you genuinely enjoyed listening to this story of corporate justice, family survival, and fighting back against the bullies, please give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep sharing these important experiences with you. I will see you all in the very next video. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and never let anyone steal your shine.